and welcome. Today I am bringing you down a reader rabbit trail, and that is the author of Nancy Drew, who is Carolyn Keene, is not actually real. Years ago, I was out book shopping, and I had asked the proprietor if he had any Nancy Drew books. And he told me where they were, and then as I was walking to go to that section, he stopped me and said, "You know Carolyn Keene wasn't a real person, right?" And I had never heard that before. I was shocked, and we ended up having this long conversation. And it was at that point that I learned about the Edward Stratemeyer Syndicate. And then fast forward until a few years ago, where I did a video on my favorite young female sleuths. I got a couple comments. One of them was somebody said, "You're a little too hard on Nancy Drew." There's a whole bunch of plot ideas that are just thrown together, and randomly Nancy Drew is right where she needs to be able to figure it all out and put it together, and she's always kidnapped. In order to resolve it. She is supposed to be dating Ned Nickerson, but even in the ski jump one, she was skiing with some ski guy and thinking it's funny that Ned's jealous. She's definitely not my favorite. And I think that probably knowing about the Stratemeyer Syndicate and that Carolyn Keene wasn't real and that I had kind of bought into that was probably a bias on my part as far as reviewing the books. But somebody at that point mentioned Kay Tracey as a series that they really enjoyed. And I was like, I've never heard of Kay Tracey. This is by Frances K. Judd. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to see if I can get a hold of a Kay Tracey, and found this beautiful copy, I think on eBay. It's lovely, so beautiful. And I read it and I was like, this feels very familiar to me. And so I did some research, and I discovered that Kay Tracey was also part of the Edward Stratemeyer Syndicate. And at that point, I decided that I was going to go down a rabbit trail on finding out as much as I could about the Edward Stratemeyer Syndicate, and that I would bring you guys along as well, because I'm guessing that there are some of you that were not aware that Carolyn Keene was not a real person. It was a pseudonym, and not only that, it was not a pseudonym for one author. It was many, many authors who wrote under the Carolyn Keene name. As part of bringing you along with me down this reader's rabbit hole about vintage female sleuth books, I am hoping to do a little mini series this month where I share with you everything that I've learned and the books that I've read and my thoughts about them. Let's go back a little bit here to Edward Stratemeyer and who he was. Edward Stratemeyer was born in 1862, and growing up, he loved the Horatio Alger stories. And it turns out that these stories are also part of a syndicate. It's called the World Syndicate, is who bought this out. And so this concept of having an author who writes a lot of different books, but then as he ages, he's not able to continue the series, is a theme in Edward's life, because Stratemeyer himself was an author, and Horatio Alger came to him as he was a young man and said, "Hey, are you interested in writing some stories under the Horatio Alger name?" And so that, I think, was kind of the genesis for Edward Stratemeyer kind of developing this idea. And so he is really credited for becoming a very astute book packager. So if Horatio Alger Jr. was coming to him, Edward Stratemeyer, and saying, "Hey, are you interested in writing under this name?" We know that Edward Stratemeyer must have been a good author, and he was, but he started to realize that books that were under pseudonyms and not under his name sold better. So Stratemeyer himself wrote the Dave Porter series from 1905 until 1919. He wrote 30 books in that series. He did, I believe, eventually write under Horatio Alger as well, but he realized at the turn of the century that pseudonyms were moneymakers, as well as this book packager concept where you have this assembly line established for book series where you are maximizing efficiency as well as the popularity of the book. So you're maximizing that popularity of series, and you can just churn them out. If you have multiple people writing them, you're not having people who are getting saturated and burned out. You've got a fresh writer who's got new ideas, as long as they understand the theme of under which they are writing. And he also recognized, I think because of his love with Horatio Alger, that there was this untapped children's market, that children's books were not very available. And so he realized that if he could take advantage of this untapped market and provide something to fill that hole with pseudonyms and a lot of different writers, that there was this untapped market that he could get into. This idea of a syndicate was so controversial that in 1901, the Newark Public Library, because he was based in New Jersey, the Newark Public Library banned any Stratemeyer Syndicate books. And he was quoted as saying it didn't really bother him because in Newark, sales were up. So even though they weren't being put out in the library, people were buying them. So I'm just going to share a little bit of the names of the series that Stratemeyer was involved in. I actually will also link the Stratemeyer Syndicate website into the description box below. And also will just, as I'm reading them, I will just go ahead and scroll through and show you the books that he was a part of. The list is massive. And the thing to remember too is even though you might be seeing one book, many of them are series with so many books inside of that series. We've got Tom Swift, and then also Tom Swift Jr. by Victor Appleton. Again, this was all ghost written. We've got The Bobbsey Twins, Everybody Loves by Laura Lee Hope. That was started in 1904. That was part of the Stratemeyer Syndicate, written by multiple authors. Happy Hollisters. We've got Honey Bunch. We also have The Hardy Boys. So Frank Dixon, not a real person. That was in the 1920s. The Tollivers. There were just so many. The list is just endless. So just to go through really quickly the authors, I think sometimes you would think like, oh, they were ghost writers. They weren't, there was kind of like this, he was taking advantage of them. When in fact, my research shows that he actually was paying the authors well. So your typical journalist, newspaper reporter, and that really was the people that he was tapping to write these, they would make like $60 to $70. He was paying $75 up to $250 for those series that were even more popular. So he was paying everyone very well. Edward Stratemeyer then died in 1930, and he basically left his business to his daughters. And his daughters ran that business until Harriet's death in 1982. And his daughters actually were also writers. So Harriet wrote 72 of the Bobbsey twin books. Edna, the other daughter, she wrote one of the Kay Tracey books as well. So they're both writers, and they were obviously had very good business acumen as well, because Nancy Drew did not fade off into oblivion. I think Nancy Drew has maintained her status in the book world. I think also within, female sleuths absolutely is at the top of that list. The Hardy Boys, maybe not as much, but Nancy Drew, that franchise has really lasted on, and they've done a good job of, making it newer. They've got, other series that kind of followed along. They had the young Nancy Drew. It turned into movies, all kinds of things. So that franchise really was successful, and I think the women did a great job running the business. So now we'll get into the books that I've read that, again, were kind of what spurred me on into researching this. So Nancy Drew came out April 28th, 1930. Unfortunately, Edward Stratemeyer died 12 days later. So he and Nancy Drew were only together for 12 days. And I think she is kind of the legacy that he has left. Nancy Drew was written by the pseudonym Carolyn Keene. There are over 600 books that are written under the Nancy Drew franchise. She is the most famous female young sleuth ever. As I mentioned, the first book was published on April 28th in 1930. The first ones were written by Mildred Wirt Benson. I will come back to Mildred Wirt Benson in another video because she also did write books under her own name of other female sleuths. But she was the one who really started off writing Nancy Drew and kind of got that going. And then she moved to other series as well, which we'll get into. And then, of course, there were other authors that wrote for Nancy Drew. On the back of this, you can see that there, on this original dust jacket, it talks about the Dana Girls Mystery Series by the author of the Nancy Drew Mystery Series, Dana Girls Mystery. And there's a whole big list of them. So I went down that trail as well and thought, well, if they were also written by Carolyn Keene, what are they like? So I actually got this by The Light of the Study Lamp by Carolyn Keene. This is the first book in the Dana Girls series. And then my library had this poor, janky, stained, taped up version of the Dana Girls. I think this is the 5th book in the series. So the Dana Girls started in 1934. So they were 4 years after Nancy Drew. The Stratemeyer Syndicate were like, Nancy Drew's taken off and really popular. Let's try to capitalize on that and let's create some of these other female sleuths as well. Let's have a sister sibling set do these types of mysteries. And so they created the Dana Girls series. And you can really see the similarities here of our sleuths. Here's this one as well. In the Dana Girls series, we have Louise and Jean, and they are orphans. They are being raised by their uncle and aunt, although they're not married together. Uncle Ned is the one who seems to be in at least the ones that I read the most. They are staying at Starhurst boarding school. So we have this boarding school setting, which I really enjoyed. I also liked that they were sisters, so they could kind of bounce ideas off of each other, but then also one of them could be in massive peril and the other one is trying to get everyone excited to go and find them. So I loved the sister aspects. I really enjoyed the Dana Girls that I read. These were really cute. I mean, they were wild, so people would just like lend them cars. There was one time when a tiger escaped out of a circus and was like a threat. So just a lot of like wild things. And it's like it ends the chapter and you're like, oh my gosh. And then within the next couple paragraphs, everything's calmed down. They fed the tiger chocolate and everything's okay. Because of the boarding school setting, our Dana Girls actually, they have a group of friends, very much like, you know, Nancy Drew develops these friendships that continue on, but they also have like girls that are really mean and like a nemesis. In this one, the girl plays a really mean trick and one of the sisters gets injured and in a whole heap of trouble. So I think that's an interesting thing too, because you don't necessarily see that so much in Nancy Drew, but in this, we've got this character who continues to be just a thorn in these sisters' side. So the Dana Girls, I would recommend looking for them. I found this pretty easily and it wasn't super expensive. And then, like I said, my library actually had some too. So if you like Nancy Drew, definitely try out the Dana Girls. And also I want to know, let me know if you've heard of them or have read them. Have I just been living under a rock? Because I did not know about the Dana Girls. So something I did want to mention in my video where I compared female sleuths and I was hard on Nancy Drew, I decided that I would go ahead and pick one up fresh that I haven't read. So I just grabbed this one off my shelf. It is The Secret of Redgate Farm. And I really enjoyed it. It's, you know, obviously we're developing from the first one into the friendships more and the father kind of recognizing it. I did notice that it starts off where it mentions some of her other mysteries to like give Nancy Drew credibility. And as I was reading it, I was like, this is very familiar to The Secret of the Hermitage. The Secret of the Hermitage also starts mentioning some of the previous books, you know, cases that the Dana girls have solved. But even the puzzle in here where you've got the alphabet and numbers and they're trying to like decode a puzzle, a numeric puzzle, I'm like, this is the same. So I did some research and it turns out Mildred Wirt Benson, who wrote our, you know, first few books of Nancy Drew, also wrote The Secret of the Hermitage. She was a very prolific writer. And again, learning about her and realizing that she wrote so many of these early Nancy Drews and some of these Dana girls, I thought, you know, I want to try to find the book that she has written under her own name. It's actually very difficult to find. It's so much easier to find these, you know, book packaged series that she was a part of than her own, under her own name series was. But we will get into that more in detail in another video. I think it would be so fun to, you know, pick these up and know the writers well enough to be able to say, like, I've seen that before. I've seen that trope before. I've seen that resolution before. I've seen them kind of having like similar concepts in it. Another thing is this, by the light of the study lamp, memory loss was a big part in it. And memory loss was a big part in The Secret of the Red Scarf. So then I was like, was that the same author? It turns out that they're not. But there are definitely similarities through them all. But again, if you like Nancy Drew and you want to try something new, I would recommend giving the Dana girls a try. And then we come to Kay Tracey. So she also was born in 1934. This is, you can see, it's a little bit, I think, thinner than the Nancy Drews and the Dana sisters are. So Kay Tracey, she only had 18 books, and this went until the 1940s. This was also a really sweet story. So if you can find a Kay Tracey book or maybe find it at a library, I could not find it in a library, but someone had mentioned in the comments of my previous video how much they loved Kay Tracey, and I can see why. Kay Tracey is different than Nancy Drew in that she has a mother. She has more of like this innocence about her. In this, she comes across this young man who has these memory issues. He can't remember his name and what he was doing. And she's like, oh, I know, I'll bring him to my house. And her mother's like, okay. And so they have this invalid recovering from memory issues of somebody they don't know who he is. And he's just staying in their house and she's taking care of him, and the mother is too. So there is this level of, because Kay is younger, I think she's younger than Nancy Drew. She seems like it. There's just this level of innocence about her. I also feel like Nancy Drew is a little bit more methodical about how she is going about solving these mysteries. Her intuition is more like, this person's bad. Whereas in this, Kay's intuition was more like, this person is good and I'm going to give them a chance. And she just kind of, by coincidence, I think, and by fortune, she ends up kind of getting to the resolution of this. This is the only Kay Tracey that I have read, but I definitely would be interested in reading more of them, and really enjoyed her innocence and her relationship with her family and how all of this resolved. So let me know if you have read a Kay Tracey or are familiar with her. Let me know if you have kind of noticed through reading Nancy Drew that some of them have similar puzzles or plots or seem to be written similarly. Let me know if you knew Carolyn Keene wasn't real. And then also let me know if you have read any of the Dana girls, also by Carolyn Keene. I would love to know that as well. I am planning on doing more videos in this vintage female sleuth genre, so be sure to look for them soon. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.